She thought he was just a drifter cowboy, but he owned half the state and hadn't loved in years. "You look like you could use a miracle or a mechanic." Ellie startled, nearly dropping her wrench as she squinted through the dust. Her truck's hood was propped open, steam rising from the engine like a ghost. She spun toward the voice and saw him, tall, dust-covered, sitting astride, a black horse that looked like it belonged in an old western. He wore a battered hat pulled low over his eyes and a worn denim shirt that matched the land behind him. She straightened her back, hands still clutching the wrench. "Depends on which one you're offering." The cowboy gave a half-smile. "Well, I left my miracle kit back at the last ghost town, but I'm decent with engines and horses if you've got those too." Ellie hesitated. The sun was dropping fast. Her phone was dead, and she was still 10 mi out from the ranch. Coyotes had started to howl in the distance. "Truck overheated," she muttered. "Or maybe the alternator shot. I'm no expert." "Mind if I take a look?" he asked, dismounting slowly. She nodded, watching him carefully as he approached. He moved with quiet confidence. No rush, no swagger, just steady steps that crunched softly on gravel. He set his saddlebag down, removed a rag, and leaned over the engine like he had done it 100 times. Ellie crossed her arms. "What's your name?" "Robert. Just Robert." He looked up briefly. "That's what I go be." She gave a short nod, unsure if that answer satisfied her. He worked in silence for a few minutes, wiping grease from a hose and checking the fan belt. The sun dipped below the hills, and the shadows began to stretch longer across the ground. "You live around here?" she asked, mostly to fill the silence. He shook his head. "Just passing through." "You from this state?" "Close enough to smell it, far enough not to belong." Ellie didn't know what that meant, but something about the way he said it made her stop pressing. After 20 minutes, he wiped his hands on his jeans and looked up at her. "She'll need a tow." "Radiator's busted," I figured, she sighed. "There's a ranch about 10 mi west, mine, got a trailer and another truck there. If you can help me hitch it, I'll feed you dinner." Robert tipped his hat slightly. "Deal." It took another hour to hitch the truck to his horse and get her gear loaded into his saddlebag. She followed him on foot for a while until he insisted she ride. She climbed up behind him, awkward but grateful, trying not to lean too close, but the night air was cooling fast. When they reached the edge of her land, the old wooden sign greeted them. Silver Bend Ranch, 1979. The lights from the porch glowed soft and warm against the dusk. Horses in the pasture lifted their heads but didn't. Robert led them to the barn and helped unhitch everything in silence. "You any good with tools?" Ellie asked as they unloaded the supplies. "Depends on the job. I've got a busted gate and a leaky roof." "If you're looking for work," he glanced at her. "Just a few days, then I'll move on." She nodded. Just a few days. Later that night, Ellie set a plate of stew and cornbread on the table inside the small kitchen. Robert sat across from her, freshly showered, but still in those weather-worn clothes. He ate like someone who was grateful, not starving, and never once asked for more than she offered. She watched him from over her glass. "You ever settle anywhere?" He shook his head. "Not in a long time. Running from something. Running toward peace," he said simply. That answer caught her off guard. The wind outside picked up, brushing the window panes with soft fingers. The night settled around them in a hush. They spoke little after that. She offered him the spare room in the old bunkhouse beside the barn. He accepted, thanked her, and stepped out into the moonlight. Ellie locked the door behind him, her brow furrowed. There was something about him, calm but distant. Kind but closed off. A drifter cowboy, she thought. One of the old kind. She shook her head, poured herself another glass of water, and turned off the lights. But sometime just before dawn, a crash shattered the quiet. Ellie bolted upright, heart pounding. Outside, the horses were screaming. She grabbed the rifle by the door, threw on her boots, and ran toward the barn. She'd barely made it halfway before she saw them. 3 figures in the shadows, moving fast, one already inside the barn. One of the doors hung off its hinges. Then came the sound of fists grunting, a body hitting the wall. She raised the rifle, trembling, but then saw movement at the side. Robert. He moved like lightning, grabbing one of the intruders by the collar and slamming him against the post. The man dropped. Another charged him, but Robert sidestepped, drove a punch into his ribs. then swept his legs from under him in a move that was too fluid to be Cowboy, too clean to be drunk luck. The third man took one look at Robert and ran. By the time Ellie reached the scene, Robert was checking the locks on the stalls, calming the horses. "You okay?" she gasped. "Better question for them," he replied, nodding toward the two groaning men on the ground. She stared at him, stunned. "Who are you?" He met her gaze. "Just Robert!" But Ellie wasn't sure she believed that anymore. Robert worked with his sleeves rolled and his words few. By mid-morning the next day, he had already repaired the broken barn door, reinforced 2 stalls, and fixed the loose hinges on the feed shed. Ellie watched him from a distance, chewing on the end of a pencil as she sat on the porch steps with her paperwork forgotten in her lap. She had seen grown men buckle under the weight of a stubborn horse or curse their way through a simple gate repair. But Robert moved with a quiet rhythm, like he had nothing to prove. His hands were steady, precise, calloused but not careless. He didn't rush. He didn't brag. He just fixed. And that unsettled her more than the break-in the night before. Ellie waited until the last nail was hammered in before approaching. He wiped his brow, turned toward her like he already knew she was there. "Thanks," she said, "for last night." He nodded. "You get much trouble out here?" Sometimes land like this tends to draw interest, especially from people who want to take what they didn't earn. Robert didn't reply, just walked toward the trough and splashed water on his face. "You ever learn how to throw someone like that in a bar fight?" she asked, folding her arms. Robert looked up, water dripping from his jawline. "Not exactly. You move like someone trained," he said. "Nothing." She stepped closer. "You know, it's real hard to trust someone who won't tell you a damn thing about themselves." He dried his face with a rag and looked at her evenly. "You trust me enough to let me stay? That was before you started breaking ribs in the dark like some ex-special ops." He almost smiled. "Almost. I told you just, Robert. And I told you that doesn't fly here. You're either running from something, hiding something, or both. So which is it?" Robert looked out over the pasture. The horses grazed quietly, the wind tugging at the tall grass. He didn't answer right away. "Sometimes people lose things," he said softly, "and they don't want to talk about them." Ellie's jaw tensed, but something in his voice, some crack just barely there, gave her pause. She nodded once. "Well, you earned a few more nights. That's all I'm saying." He gave her a small nod. "That's all I need." Over the next few days, Robert fell into a rhythm on the ranch. He was up before sunrise, helped with feed, patched a section of the fence that had been sagging for months, and even managed to calm Ellie's most difficult mare, Dusty, with nothing but a low whistle and steady hands. Ellie, for her part, kept trying to puzzle him out. She asked questions in passing, where he grew up, what brought him west, if he'd ever trained horses professionally. But every answer was vague, carefully worded, as if he was building a wall, even as he walked beside her. One night after a long day of work, they sat on the porch, watching the sky turn from amber to deep blue. Ellie broke the silence first. "My dad used to say, land was only as good as the man willing to stay and work it." Robert nodded, his gaze on the horizon. "You believe that?" she asked. "I believe land remembers the hands that build it and the feet that run from it." She tilted her head. "And which are you?" He looked at her, then really looked. Eyes shadowed but honest. "I used to build. Then I ran, still figuring out which one wins in the end." For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Ellie asked, "You good with horses because you love them, or because they listen better than people?" Robert chuckled softly. "Little of both." Ellie smiled. "You ever think about staying in one place?" His eyes didn't leave the land. "Sometimes you think about staying here." He turned to her slower this time. "Would it matter if I did?" She blinked, her chest tightened. "I don't let people in easy," she said quietly. "Me neither." Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them. Acknowledgement, maybe even understanding. No declarations, no promises. Just two people who had learned to survive the hard way, wondering if maybe this time was different. Then in the distance, the sound of a truck rumbled over the gravel road. Ellie stood, tension snapping back into her shoulders. "That's Ray." Robert watched her face change. "Problem?" She nodded grimly. "Big one. And just like that, the calm they'd built was about to be tested. The truck pulled up in a cloud of dust, its engine growling low like a warning. Ellie stood frozen on the porch, arms crossed tightly across her chest, jaw locked in a way Robert hadn't yet seen. Ray stepped out of the driver's seat, like he owned the land beneath him. Same as always. He was all tanned and wore a tailored buttoned-down that didn't belong anywhere near dirt. His smile was wide, pro.